G'day so-and-sos and welcome to my sewing room. If we haven't met before, my name is Kathy, and if we have met before, then welcome back to my channel. Glad to have you. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be making these gift baskets. So I've got this one, which is just a good overall size, and then this one, which I've designed more for a wine bottle or something like that. Now, the great thing about these is that both of these are the same size rectangles. I've just orientated one long ways to do this one, and then to do that one, I just flipped it up the other way and did the corners that way. So nice and easy. Now, if you're new to bag making, you are going to learn a lot of the fundamentals today, which is going to really help you on your bag journey. And if you are a more experienced sewer or bag maker, then you're going to whip these up like that. I reckon these would be great to sell at markets, but they're just great to be able to make and give to your family and friends as well. So I'm ready to go. Let's get cracking. Now let's have a look at my measurements, fabric and interfacing. So all of my pieces are 16 by 13 inches, and then my straps and my ties are all 13 inches. So I'll pop that in the description box and up on the screen as well. So I'll be using cotton woven for my pieces. So that's what I'm going to use for my outside. And with that, I'm going to interface it with this medium iron-on interfacing. Now you'll notice that this stuff doesn't have a weave in it like you'd see in fabric. It's more like a paper or a cardboard. And that is going to give me the sort of stiffness that I want to this piece. So we get those nice corners and that nice shape. Then for my lining, same thing, cotton woven. And with that, I'll be using a light iron-on interfacing. And that will just give me a little bit more firmness and durability to my lining. So think about that when you're picking out your interfacing. And then, like I said, I have two 13-inch straps, and I've just cut these out of a piece of webbing. And then two 13-inch ties. And this is just whatever this stuff is called. It's just on a nice big roll, and it's got a bit of stretch to it. But just use ribbon or make your own little ties, whatever you've got. Let's have a look at how we cut out the corners on this. Now let's have a look at how we're going to shape our corners. So I have one of my exterior pieces. This is the one with the stiffer interfacing on it. I'm going to place it wrong side up, so the interfacing side is the wrong side, and then the pretty side is the right side. I'm going to grab my ruler, and I am going to measure in, geez Kathy, that way. I'm going to measure in 2 3/4 inches across the top, and then 2 3/4 inches along the bottom. Like that. So this line is 2 3/4 and this is 2 3/4. If it's easier for you just to place your ruler like that, measure up 2 3/4 and then along the bottom and do it that way and then join it up, then do whatever is easiest for you. Then I'm going to grab my ruler and I'm going to measure up from this top line here 1/4 inch and give myself a mark there. And then I'm going to join that mark with the corner of my square, like that. Okay, so pretty easy so far. And then the same thing over here. I'm going to measure in 2 3/4 along the top, and then 2 3/4 along the bottom. Like that, 2 3/4 inches. And then measure up from this line another 1/4 inch and give myself that line across. Now this bit is just going to help our bag sit a little bit flatter without a bit of a curved bum. Right, and then I'm going to cut this out. So this bag is just so easy to make, and you can change up the measurements to whatever you want and make different sizes for different things. Cool. So then we have a shape like that. Now I'm going to use this as a template to cut out all my other ones. Okay, there we go. Now what I'm going to do, place this right side up, fold it in half. So I've got it orientated so those cut edges, corners are towards me. Fold that in half and give myself a little center snip at the top. So I've just cut out the tiniest little triangle to mark my center. And I'll do that on both of these pieces. Actually, I'll do it on all four. Probably don't need it on the lining, but it's really good practice to always mark your centers when we're bag making. Little snip, and then this one. Little snip. Okay. Now I'm going to grab one of my pieces of webbing, my handle, and one of my stretchy ties, and I'm going to grab my clips. Okay, now I'm going to use my mat. If you want to use a ruler, it's just as easy. But I'm lining up my center snip on one of my lines so that I can measure 1-2 inches over to one side, and then I'm going to line up my webbing with just about 1/4 of an inch overhanging the top there, because I want that caught up in my seam allowance later. And then I'll make sure there's no twists in my strap from that center snip, 1-2 this way, and I'm lining up the inside of my webbing on the 2-inch mark, so it's a full 2 inches away from that center snip, and I've got about 1/4 of an inch overhang there. Now with my tie, I'm going to place it on the center snip. So it's coming down towards me, it's not laying up, and again, it's about 1/4 inch overhang like that. So make sure your handle is over your fabric and not up that way, and that your tie, same thing, it's coming down this way. Then I'll grab one of my lining pieces, and I'm now going to place these pieces of fabric right sides together. So pretty side to pretty side. And then I'll whack some clips up along the top corners to hold it in place as I go, like that. And then holding onto that webbing, I'm just going to shift the clip to include that lining piece as well. There we go. And then I'll just whack a few extra clips along there to hold it all together in place for me. So use as many clips or pins or whatever as you like. So that's one bit. Now I'll prepare the other bit exactly the same. Okay, now we're going to take these over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this top edge at about 3/8 of an inch all the way across both of those. Okay, so I want to be a good 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I want my stitch length to be around a 3.5, and I'm going to back stitch there. And just stay nice and consistent all the way across. And back stitch at this end. And then same thing on the other piece.
103L. Yeah, they tell you about white baseball cap on. Not at the time, but they said they both say mid-20s and a light one here, light brown here. We got them on deck. Looks like
and then another back stitch at that end. Okay, so they are now sewn together. What we're going to do now is open them up, and I've got my ironing mat and my iron, and we are just going to give this seam a bit of a hit with the iron just to make it lay a little bit flat, make our life a bit easier later on. And just be careful of the webbing if that's what you've used, because high temperatures could melt it a little bit, so be mindful of that. There we go. Okay, ditch my mat and my iron. Cool bananas. Okay, I'm going to lay one of them face up, right side up in front of me, grab my other piece and place them right sides together. Make sure that your lining is with your lining and your exterior is with your exterior. Grab some clips, and I'm going to clip at the seams first. So I'm going to line up that seam, clip there, and then at the other side, clip there. And then I'm just going to start whacking some clips down both sides. Like that. So these are really good. I think these would go really well at markets. If you do local markets where you just make little things to sell there, I think these would go really well, especially if people are there shopping for a gift for someone, you know, and they buy jam or whatever, honey, whatever you buy at markets, and then they come across your store and you've got something like this. I think that'd go really well. So line up those edges. Okay. Now in a minute we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew down the sides and also along the bottom of our exterior piece. Now we're not going to sew the corners at this stage, so don't touch your corners. And then on the lining end, we're going to leave a turnout hole. So I'm going to give myself a mark. I'll show you, don't worry if you can't see this. 2 inches from either corner along the bottom of my lining, like that. So 2 inches in from this corner and 2 inches in from this corner along here. We're going to sew from this corner just in that 2 inches so that we're leaving this part unsewn so it's open. So that's going to be our turnout hole. I'm going to mark it on the other side of the fabric as well because I am terrible for forgetting and then having to unpick. So I'm just going to put some clips just along that 2-inch mark. Okay, so all clipped up, going to take that over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start on one of my long sides, come down, do the other side, down along the bottom of my exterior, and then just that little bit on my lining. Okay, so again, I'm around 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and my stitch length is still around that 3.5. Starting down on one of the bottom edges of my lining piece, and I'm going to backstitch and then just work my way up, taking it nice and easy, and just adjust if you need to. Up over this seam. You shouldn't need a hump jump, but if you do, use a hump jump there. Now, if you haven't seen one of these things before, it's called a little purple thing, or thang, T-H-A-N-G. And it's just a stiletto, just so I don't get my fingers close to that needle. And backstitch there. And then other side exactly the same. That's not me panting. If you can hear panting, that's Elvis, my sewing buddy. He's coming to join me. And remember to backstitch. So if you haven't got something like this purple thing, I'd really recommend it. It's just good to sort of hold your work, sort of, you know, smooth it out if you need to. Hold a seam down as you go over it. And it's just a good habit to get into, not to get your fingers near that needle. If you're a new sewer, even if you're an experienced one and you've never used one, then think about giving it a go. Stitch, and then along the bottom of this exterior piece, backstitch. Along the bottom, and then the lining. We're just coming in that couple of inches on either side. And backstitch well there, because we are going to turn it out. So there's going to be a little bit of pulling on that point there. So it's going to be a bit of a stress point. And start up at that other 2-inch mark. Backstitch up to the end and backstitch. And like I said, we're leaving those corners open. So that's what we look like, all sewn down. So it might be an idea to stick your finger in our bottom turnout hole and just run your fingers along those seams and just make sure that you have caught both sides all the way around. If you find a hole, go back to the sewing machine and just patch it up. Now we're going to clip together these corners. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start on my lining end. I'm going to find my corner, stick my fingers in there, in that corner bit, and pull it open and line up my seams. And then I'm going to push one seam to the right and I'm going to push the other seam to the left. We're just going to seat that seam, hard to say with a lisp, and whack a clip on there. And then just make sure that's sitting nice and flat. Fuss with it as much as you need to. Line up those edges and whack a few more clips on there, just to hold it all in place. And then do the other side. So stick my fingers in there, find the corners and pull. Now when I seat this seam, so when I push one seam to the left and one to the right, I'm going to look at what way this top one is going on this side, and it's going to my right. So I'm going to push that top one to the right so it's going the same way, and then that bottom one to the left. Now if you didn't follow that too much, don't worry. it's good practice, but on a sort of gift bag this size and whatever, it's not going to be the end of the world if you don't do that. But it's just a good habit to get into, especially if this is one of your first bags. You're right, Elvis? It's a big grown big boy. If this is one of your first bags, then it's you know, just one of those things that you sort of learn along the way. Okay, so that bottom seam is all going to be laying to my right. Same thing with this one, with the exterior. Stick my fingers in there, pull that open, match up my seams, push this side one, this one, to the left, and the top one to the right. And whack a clip on there. Get that laying flat, and then a few more clips. Now don't worry too much if your interfacing, you know, feels like it's going to get wrinkles or whatever, because we're going to iron it out at the end. So don't worry about person handling it a little bit too much. Okay, and then the other side, manhandling, you know what I mean. Match up those seams, push one to the left and one to the right, and then whack a few clips on there. Okay, cool. Now we're going to take this back over to the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch across our corners. Same thing, 3/8 of an inch. So let's go do that. Okay, so orientate your work how it's going to sit best for you, but I've got it so this bottom seam is facing up towards me, and the side seam is flat against the bed of my sewing machine. And good 3/8 of an inch. Stitch length is the same, around 3.5. And just work my way across. And just remember to backstitch. And then other side of the lining. And just make sure that you're catching both sides. Backstitch, up over that seam. And then the exterior. So same thing, the bottom seam is facing up and backstitch. Now with your exterior piece, if you wanted to, you could go over it twice, just to make sure that it is nice and sturdy, because especially if you're making it long ways, like I showed you at the beginning, for like a wine bag or something, you don't want it coming undone. So with my second line, I'm going just a little bit to my left of the original stitch line. So my original stitch line is here. I'm going just to the left of that. And backstitch. Decent backstitch. Just make sure that's nice and strong. If we smashed a bottle of wine, it would make us sad. And if you are selling them, your customers might not be happy. Hold that seam flat, and the other one is seated the other way, and that will sort of give a little bit of strength as well. And snip, and then do another line there. If you are selling these at the markets and whatever, then you do want to make sure that you are selling quality and getting a good name for yourself. And backstitch. Cool bananas. Okay, so there's my corners all done. Just getting rid of some of that loose thread. And I'm just going to trim down these seams just a little bit. Just get rid of some of that excess there. And just as you're doing this, just make sure that you've caught both sides all the way across. And there's no little bits that you've missed. And if there has, just take it back and go over it again. It happens to all of us. So don't worry about that if you have to redo it. Cool. Okay, now going to turn it out. It's always my favorite part. Stick your hand up through that turnout hole, grab one of your corners, and that's what I said before. Don't worry if your bag gets wrinkled because now we're doing this to it. It's gonna get wrinkled. And just gently pull it out. So, and the trick is to sort of gently slide your lining up over the work rather than just yanking at this end. Nice. Okay, now just really poke out those corners. This is another thing that purple thing, I've got them all over the place, is good for. You can stick it up in there and poke out your corners with it. And really get these bottom ones out. Nice. And just run your fingers along those seams and make sure they feel strong and you can't see any interfacing poking out and your finger doesn't poke out. Cool. Make sure I get that out. Okay, love that. Okay, let's get the iron again. Okay, now we're going to clip up this turnout hole and go and sew it up. So I'm just going to stick my fingers in it like that and pull just a little bit, and that sort of makes the fabric sort of go in and sit where it wants to sit. But just tuck it in if you need to. And having that nice wide 3/8 of an inch seam allowance means that we've got a fair bit of seam to work with there. So got all that tucked in, and then give that a hit with the iron and whack some clips on there. Now I've been using a black thread, so when I go back over to the sewing machine, I'm going to take a little mini to change out my thread to a yellow or whatever I've got. Of course I've got yellow, I've got every colour in the rainbow. I'm going to take the time to change out my thread to a yellow so that it's not as noticeable. So think about that as well, okay? We've come too far to sort of cut corners and leave it a colour that doesn't match. So let's go do that. Okay, so my stitch length is around a 3.5 still, but I'm going to be a little bit closer. I want to be around a 1/8 of an inch. So nice and close to that edge. So I want to make sure I'm catching both sides, and I'm starting a little bit further up than what I think I need to so I don't have a gap. And I'm going to make sure that I backstitch. And just adjust as I go if I need to. Now I know that I'm always tempted to do this bit really quick because I just think it's a nice, easy, quick bit. But you really want to try and get it right the first time so you don't have to come back and then have lines and lines of stitches across the bottom. So I'm just checking, making sure that my sides are lined up nicely, and I'll go a little bit further than what I think I have to, and backstitch. So there's my bottom sewn up, and I'm very happy with that. Okay, now I'm going to poke my lining inside the exterior and push it right down into those corners so that it's sitting nicely. And then I've got my iron heating up, and I'm going to iron all along this top edge, because we're then going to take it back over and top stitch this top bit before we top stitch along our sides to give our bag our shape. So if I just give this seam a bit of a hit with the iron now, it'll make it a lot easier to top stitch. I'm actually going to shove my iron in there and give the whole thing a bit of a hit as well. And again, I'm just going to be really careful of these handles because I don't want to melt them. It's going to get squished again when I top stitch, but that's all right. Okay, turn that off. Now I'm just going to wax some clips along the top. I'm going to start at that seam on one side and then at the other side, and just wax some clips along there just to hold it in place, and as it cools down from the iron, it'll help it just sort of sit where I want it to sit. Because when we top stitch, we want to make sure that that seam is sitting nice and flat, and you don't have a bit where all of a sudden the lining is up higher than your exterior or vice versa, like that. Now, I'm also going to change out my thread again. So I think I'm going to use a pink thread to sort of match in with my flowers and give it that black a bit of contrast. So it'll be quite obvious after I top stitch. You'll see my top stitching all the way around, and that's what I want. So I'm going to make it pink so it stands out. If you're not overly confident about your top stitching yet, then use a colour thread that's going to match in with your exterior. But it's good practice if you use a brighter colour or a different colour, really good practice to be able to see where your stitches lay, and it does make you be a little bit more careful. Okay, let's go do that. Okay, I'm going to start at one of my seams. Now, if you're using a domestic machine, you'll be able to take the end of your machine, slide that off, and you'll be able to loop your bag up over the bed of your machine so that you are top stitching from the outside. And that's ideal. But I'm going to stick with my industrial today because it was the one that I had set up. So I'm going to be sewing from the inside. So don't worry if yours looks a bit different from mine. I'm going to pop that under, starting on one of my seams. And I want to be about 1/8 of an inch, so nice and close to the top edge. I'm going to lengthen my stitch length to around 4.5 because we're top stitching, and a little back stitch, and then just carefully make my way around. I'm not going to watch my needle. I'm going to watch this part of my fabric as it lines up with that part of my foot. That will help me stay a bit more consistent. And when I get up to my handles and my little tie, I'm going to make sure they aren't folded under my bag, that they're all up here. another little back stitch on that end. Done. So there's my top stitching done, and you can see how it shows up against that black, and I'm quite happy with that. So now we're going to prepare these sides. So I've got my ironing mat and my iron heating up. Now what I'm going to do is orientate it so it's sort of sideways. My handles are over here. So here's my boxed corners that we did. And I'm going to squish it down like that. So there's my side seam. There's our boxed corner. And I'm going to squish it and fold it, and it'll sort of want to go there anyway, so that this line here is at the corner of my corner. I'm going to grab my ruler and just make sure that that's even all the way up. So it should be about the same length, about 2 3/4. So I'm just making sure that it's consistent and the same width all the way up. And just give that a hit with the iron, so that corner is nice and sharp. And then I'm going to whack some clips on there. Now I'm going to do this all the way around to both sides. If you just want to do one and take it over to the sewing machine and then top stitch this down, then you can do that. You'll iron it flat and then top stitch it down at 1/8 of an inch, around the same as what we did up here. But I think you can do it all at once, but up to you. So then I'm going to turn it around and do the other side on that same, the other corner on that same side. So fold it flat, there's my side seam, there's my corner, and just make sure that is consistent all the way up. So it's the same width here and here at the top and bottom. Give that a good hit with the iron. And clip. And this is what gives our gift bag such a nice square, not small, it's not a square, rectangular, corners. Okay, other side. Squish it open, so there's my side seam, there's my bottom. Fold that over. And measure. You can see that's quite a bit wider at the top there. Take your time and get it nice and even. Nice. And give that an iron. And this is where you'll really notice using like a cardboardy type interfacing for that outside bit, where it really pays off, because it just holds it really nice and firm. And whack some clips there, spin it round, and the other side. So really make sure that corners are poked out well. Now the other thing to really be mindful of is to make sure that your lining down here is in your seam here, that it hasn't sort of pulled away and bunched up, so that you are catching your lining with your clips all the way down too. Fold that side, because you don't want to do these side seams and then find out that you haven't caught your lining in them. The lining needs to be in them. Cool. Now I want to make sure, I just noticed that my top wasn't lined up very well there. I want to make sure my top is lined up as well. Okay. Now back over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to stitch down these side seams at 1/8 of an inch. Oh, last one, get on there, done. Okay, I'm going to start at one of my bottoms, so I can see where the bottom is because I can see where that corner is. And I'm going to pop it under my needle, foot down, needle down, and I'm at about a 1/8 of an inch. So nice and close. My stitch length is still around 4.5 because we're top stitching, so we want our stitches to be a little bit longer. And I just want a little back stitch there. And again, I'm not watching my needle, I'm watching my fabric as it lines up with my foot. And you want to make sure that your bobbin is full. Do not play bobbin chicken while you're doing this. And up over that top seam, little back stitch, and I'll do all my sides exactly the same. And done. So there we go. There she is with the sides all top stitched down, and I've given it a bit of a hit with the iron. Now you can see just how nice and flat she sits on the bottom there with that little angle bit that we cut out of our corners. So I absolutely love both of these. I think they're just a great part. It's part of the gift, isn't it? So making something for someone and putting that effort in just adds to the gift a little bit. And I think if you sold them at markets, I think these would do really, really well and use up all your scraps as well as you go. So I hope that you learnt something today, that you had fun. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, then do so. And hop over to my channel and check out my other bags. There's a lot of like simpler beginner bag maker stuff, and then I've got some more intermediate and advanced techniques and bags as well. So go and have a squiz. All right, peeps, have a great day. And remember, it's only fabric. We can always buy more. Okay, see ya. Bugger.